Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 13 of the Dateable AF Podcast. Today, our topic is Insight Isn't Self-Attack, when self-awareness turns into self-criticism. Rachel, you know, as well as I do, the people who are almost too self-aware, that people who think the goal of personal growth is self-awareness. And I think that is true up to a point, but then there's this pattern that we see all the time where people get really insightful about themselves. And instead of that creating freedom, it turns into this constant internal critique of themselves.
Yeah, I think, beginning to notice flaws and missteps. Then you're starting to focus on things that you think are wrong with you. And you're not, that's not the positive part of self-awareness.
Right. Absolutely. And today I want us to talk on the pod about the difference between healthy self-awareness, which is a good thing, and that kind of insight that quietly turns into self-criticism. This makes me think of when I was in grad school, we took a course about the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Therapists, so that we learned how to diagnose people. And they told us about this tendency for people to have what's called medical student syndrome. And it's when you start learning about these diagnoses and you're like, oh my God, do I have that? What about that? And so it's like you get all this awareness and you're like, well, I can be selfish sometimes. Maybe I'm a narcissist or, things like that. And I think that that's sort of an extreme version of what we're talking about here, that you learn about things and then you start looking at yourself in this really critical way.
I have my stepdaughter can't watch The Pit or any of the other great medical shows because she does self-diagnose that night. Whatever's been on there, she's gonna be concerned that she has it.
So, yeah, absolutely.
That's not helpful self-awareness.
No, it's not. Have you watched The Pit? It's so good.
It is amazingly good. I love it. It's excellent. And it is the very real sort of visceral stuff that they show. It's excellent.
Yep. I want Dr. Robbie to be my doctor.
Really?
He's so empathetic. He's so nice.
He is nice.
My doctor's like, girl, you're fine. Why you come in here? You're fine. Not really. Just kidding.
Actually, on sort of a similar doctor's note, I just have to throw this in here because it's funny. I was just having lunch with a friend and she was talking about a breast exam she had just recently went through where the chair slides. And so the nurse, she's describing to me I don't know if it was the doctor or the nurse, where they had given her an injection and then they were holding, the nurse wanted to hold her breast in place so that she wouldn't move it. And all I could think of while I was hearing that story was, I wonder if that nurse was really good looking.
Of course, only you would think of that.
Because my friend, she's real serious about this procedure. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, what if she was attractive? Well,
you've been single for too long.
Could you just hold both of them? Anyway, I digress.
This is how you know. This is how you know you've been single too long, when you start looking forward to your mammogram.
But that was a special mammogram, and of course I did have to ask the question, but I did ask first about the procedure. I held that question to the end. And by the way, was she good looking? And she said, actually, she really was. It was lost on her. She's a straight girl. I'm like,
well, didn't matter anyway, I guess.
Okay. Well, back to
our topic. Well, let's talk for a minute about what healthy self-awareness actually is. I would describe healthy self-awareness as the ability to just notice yourself, like notice what your reactions are, what your patterns are, noticing your strengths, and also noticing if you have some blind spots. And the way to sort of differentiate is you can tell, because self-awareness is observational, it's not judgmental.
That's interesting to me. Is That's a great way to tease it out, is observational, not judgmental. I do believe that it's really difficult to receive feedback and then from somebody and then put it into a healthy sort of self-awareness position in you.
Yes.
So, when somebody tells you, "Hey, you may have been, you're coming across in a too harsh a manner or whatever." I think it's difficult. It may be something you need to be more self-aware of. I think it's really hard to receive that and then observe it instead of being
Mhm.
judgmental about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I have people in therapy who distinctly remember one comment someone made to them when they were a child,
Wow.
and they carry that as a fact about themselves into adulthood. And so that's the kind of thing that, man, that's being really harsh with yourself. And so, finding the balance between those things is important, because you want to be curious about yourself, but you don't want to feel ashamed about what you see. So the idea is just to be
Mm.
kind of this objective observer as much as you can about yourself.
Boy, and that is really hard. I mean, how many of us are an objective observer?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to be. And like, your self-awareness is supposed to create understanding. You're supposed to understand yourself better so that you can open the doors to growth. So if you know, for example, that you're an impatient person, well, you don't have to beat yourself up about it. You just think, oh, patience is something that I'm not so great at. So I'd like to grow in that area. It shouldn't become, self-awareness shouldn't become like a running commentary on everything that you're doing wrong.
Well, also, you can be insightful and mindful of not letting it turn into criticism. Oh my Lord. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm gonna mute myself for a minute.
Clearly, both my dog and Rachel's dog are really wanting to be known on the podcast. So that little bark that you're hearing is Frankie. We have not heard my dog Navidad yet today. But anyway, back to our topic. So I think that sometimes insight turns into self-attack. So if you're a thoughtful, reflective person, that insight can just do a quick flip into self-criticism. And, those times when you kind of replay conversations in your head over and over again, and you analyze your tone and you wonder if you were too much, if you were not enough, if you were somehow too emotional or too distant. I mean, sometimes I do that too. Like, I replay things in my head. Yesterday, um, I was at the gym, and I we were doing some lifts off the rack, and there were only a few women in the class, and so we were all going to share this rack. And this, I had set it up with the height that we needed, because we're women, we're all a little shorter than the guys, and I had set it up with the barbell that we needed. And this guy just came over and set himself up, tried to set himself up on my rack, on our weight rack. And I was like, I said, "Hey friend, we just set that up for the women's bar." And he looked at me kind of shocked, and then he scurried off to another bar. You're still muted.
I
Um,
know I'm open now.
okay.
I know.
Um,
I Go
he,
ahead.
he scurried off to another bar, and then I second guessed myself. Like, yeah, I don't know. I just was like, "Oh, was that rude? Should I not have said that?" And I said it in a nice way. I literally said it just like that, like, "Hey, friend, we already had that one set up for us." Um, But yeah, anyway, I think that's just an example of how something small can just turn into self-doubt or self-criticism pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be said about that with women in weight rooms and all the gender stuff that goes on there and
Mhm.
assumptions that are made
That is
and
true.
and uh I'm going to let you carry this conversation solo for just a minute because there's something outside that I need to deal with real quickly, and then I will be right back. Y'all try not to miss me too much. You carry on.
So the more language that people have for psychology, psychological terms, for diagnoses, I think the easier it can become to diagnose themselves constantly. And I think instead of just being curious about themselves, it sort of starts to turn into a performance review.
I was talking about the DSM. You had mentioned the DSM. The audience doesn't know what that is, but what does it stand for?
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the kind of Bible for therapists to give people mental health diagnoses.
Right. And if you haven't ever looked at it, it's actually pretty fun to look at. I think it's online now, but we used to access this big old book and they would update it, after, I guess, maybe year to year. But so what's in it, for instance, is something like, let's say you're trying to decide if someone has schizophrenia, then it's going to give you a whole list of the things that might indicate that someone has schizophrenia. And then there are the main indicators. And if you have a certain number of those, tells you whether or not you
Whether you
actually
qualify for the diagnosis. Yeah.
qualify for the diagnosis. And I do remember looking at that thing on several things and going, ooh, I think I got 4 of these. How many does it take? Oh,
Like
thank God.
I
It's
do
like,
talk to myself sometimes. Yeah, exactly.
anyway, it was kind of fun. I enjoyed it.
It is kind of fun. And the thing is though, if you're constantly monitoring yourself like that, then you might be growing, but the growth just starts to feel exhausting instead of empowering.
Well, and we were chatting a little bit about people that are successful and that they have a tendency to, self monitor. And why is it that people that are successful typically do more of that?
Yeah, I do. I think high functioning people fall into this trap more than other people. And I think they're just constantly paying attention. They're constantly adjusting themselves and they're constantly trying to get it right. And those skills can be really helpful professionally. Like, yeah, that's how you grow in your job. You're constantly monitoring yourself. But man, I think there's a point where it turns a corner and it becomes excessive and you kind of become hyper vigilant about your own behavior.
Perfectionists really need to look out for this. I think that if you know you're a perfectionist, having worked with a perfectionist, they can absolutely make your work excellent because they're not going to let any T go uncrossed or any I not be dotted appropriately. At the same time, the self criticism and the reaction to the mistake is just really tough. What a tough critic of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you get to this point where you're not really experiencing your life anymore. You're just constantly evaluating yourself inside that life. And God, the example I have for this is social media. That
Mm.
if you're out in the world having an experience, then you're immersed in it. You're present. But if you're trying to make it look perfect for social media, then you're constantly thinking about the angle of the camera and am I getting the right picture? Am I getting the right video? How do I look here? And like that's just one example of how that constant monitoring what shows up in people's daily lives.
And think about this as it relates to dating relationships. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the level of internal pressure just makes it hard for you to relax.
God, no kidding. And yeah, this goes back to something we've talked about so many times that being yourself is what makes you the most attractive. So if you're constantly checking yourself and evaluating and diagnosing yourself, then you're not you're not being present. And that's, you know, that can turn into something that's really unappealing.
I also have noticed that people sometimes um, throw those things out about themselves, uh, which really comes across as them being dismissive or putting themselves down. And I don't
Mhm.
know, from a therapist standpoint, um, I I'm sure there's attention-seeking behavior in that, or maybe the need for somebody to tell them that it's really not true. But I can't imagine that isn't it's not helpful.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's not helpful and it doesn't really draw people to you. I think there's a kind of humor that's sort of self-deprecating humor that can be funny and it can, it can make you seem cute. But I think when that turns to self-criticism, it turns people off. We don't want to be around other people who are mean to themselves or harsh with themselves.
no, it does make me want to, to our other episode, rescue them in some way.
Yeah,
Uh, and none of that kind of conversation is good conversation.
no, absolutely not. And so the cost of like turning that insight into self-criticism is that you start hesitating. You're not speaking as freely because you're constantly evaluating whether what you're saying is okay. You overthink interactions that you have with people. You apologize for things that aren't even wrong. And I think instead of that making you feel more confident in relationships, you just start to feel more self-conscious.
Oh yeah. In my dating experience, I have had a number of conversations with women where they were making assumptions and they were inside their head about stuff that was just overthinking things. And had they just said it out loud, it would have been easy for me to go, "Oh no, 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 that was not, you know, that is not at all a problem, or that's not
Mhm.
something that had even crossed my radar screen." But
Yeah.
definitely, um, oftentimes we just have stuff rolling around up there when you're not confident,
Yeah.
and you are overthinking it, that you're just taking something in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And it's funny because people even do that in therapy. They'll come back to a therapy session and be like, "Oh, I hope I didn't hurt your feelings when I said blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "What?" Like, I literally never gave that another thought, but they've been thinking about it since the last session. So yeah, overthinking that's not leading you anywhere good. So basically, I think it's that skill that's supposed to help you grow, ends up making you feel like, "Oh, I'm never really getting this right."
Well, it is a balancing act because people who know themselves and have that are introspective, I find appealing. Uh,
Yeah.
because it helps you understand how you better relate to somebody else and the impact that you have on others.
Yeah. For
And
sure.
so that, I think what we're talking about here is something, like you said, that is really a good skill, can quickly turn into a bad thing if you don't understand how to balance it.
Yeah.
Because I know it was funny. I was just having a phone conversation with somebody today, talking about being critical of somebody. And um, I was aware that that person that I was talking to does not kind of grew up with a mother that was really critical.
Mhm.
And um, and I'm aware of that. And so I try to, but she's thick skinned as well. And what she said was, you know what, the value that I took from that is that I actually use the criticism to tweak and make changes. So I
Hmm.
think over time she's looked at it, and the impression I have is that she balances it, like not letting it all sink in, but seeing it as an opportunity to self analyze a little bit to see if there are things that she could do differently that might make her life better.
Yeah, that sounds great. And on that note, let's keep going with that. Let's talk about what healthier self-awareness can actually look like. The first thing I would say about that is I think it includes self-compassion. That instead of beating yourself up, you're like, "Oh yeah, I do that sometimes." So you're aware, but it's okay. Like, yeah, I make mistakes sometimes and it's okay.
Yes. My God. And again, I'm just going to say this about perfectionists because it has been a life experience for me, is that it, I have felt, because I am not a perfectionist, sometimes I just feel like it's the best blessing in the world because I just assume every day when I wake up that I am going to make a series of mistakes. I try really hard not to make any that are just life altering. but guaranteed I'm going to step in it throughout the day in one way or another. And I, I just don't, I mean, it'll drag you down if you are frozen because you're terrified that you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. I will also say, I think some of that comes with age. When I was younger, I was much more afraid of making a mistake. And now I'm like, man, yeah, mistakes happen. It's fine.
Yeah. And that also is, there are some, easy ways to sort of give yourself positive language around that. Like, that didn't land the way I intended it.
Yeah.
If you're, it's like,
Yep. Just being kind to yourself. I can see why that situation triggered me instead of getting mad at yourself for getting triggered.
yeah, or next time I'll handle that differently.
Yep. Those are perfect. I think all of those things just allow room for imperfection, because the truth is growth is never going to come from attacking yourself. Trying to be a drill sergeant with yourself is not sustainable. It's not actually going to make you feel better.
No. And your, insight should make your life feel lighter, not heavier.
Yes. Yeah. Like just notice your patterns, respond with curiosity, respond with care, and yeah, be gentle with yourself about the ways that you're imperfect. Well, let's wrap this up and talk about what takeaways we want our audience to get from this episode about insight.
Well, self-awareness is meant to help you understand yourself, not criticize yourself.
Yes. And insight becomes harmful when your curiosity turns into judgment. So try to just stay in that place of being curious.
Yeah, I think curious is one of the words that comes across in every single episode that we've recorded. And
Yes.
and the difference, well, that transition from curiosity to judgment is something you have to really look out for.
Yeah. Yeah, because growth doesn't require constant self-correction.
Yeah. And you're allowed to learn about yourself without putting yourself on trial. And that is just being open to, and again, just kind of outside looking in and just observe and don't be so critical of yourself.
Yep, absolutely. So if you have listened to this episode and it's struck a chord with you, and you want to talk to your partner or your friend or your family member about this, here's the question that we want you to ask. When we reflect on our behavior in relationships, do we tend to approach it with curiosity or do we approach it with criticism? And we would love to hear what you think and what you discuss with your families and friends about this. You can reach out to us by email, info@dateableaf.com, or you can always connect with us on Instagram @dateableaf. If this conversation made you think of someone else, maybe who is hard on themselves, please share this podcast with them. As always, we want to thank you for listening to the Dateable AF podcast, where we help you find your happy ending.
And remember, be bold, be kind, and for the love of self-respect, don't text your ex. Stay dateable.
AF.